What if the 1950s were not just about flying saucers and rubber monsters, but about hidden genius buried under B-movie posters and cheap budgets? Imagine an era where paranoia and poetry collided on black and white film stock, where directors whispered truth under the threat of censorship. These are the forgotten visions of the atomic decade. Here are 14 sci-fi masterpieces you forgot were brilliant. Number 14. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1959. When it released, few cared. Audiences expected aliens and laser beams, not newsroom drama and climate panic. But this British film dared to imagine a world spinning out of orbit because of human recklessness. The story follows cynical reporter Peter Stenning as he discovers the horrifying truth that nuclear testing has knocked Earth off its axis. London bakes in unbearable heat, while humanity pretends everything is fine. The movie was banned in some markets for its bleak tone and political implications. It suggested that governments would rather hide the apocalypse than stop it. Director Val Guest shot scenes with distorted lenses and overexposed film to mimic the sweltering madness of a dying planet. Even the dialogue crackles with doom. Critics at the time called it too grim, too unpatriotic, too British to sell in America. Decades later, its realism feels prophetic. There are no monsters here, only our own arrogance. Today, its cult following grows each year among climate fiction fans who call it the first eco-sci-fi thriller ever made. It was not spectacle that made it unforgettable. It was the silence between headlines. The slow realization that mankind's greatest threat was its own mirror. Number 13. The Incredible Shrinking Man, 1957. At first glance, it seemed like just another creature feature from Universal. A man shrinks after being exposed to a mysterious mist. The posters promised shock and spectacle, but what audiences got was an existential masterpiece. Scott Carey's gradual loss of size becomes a haunting allegory for masculinity, ego, and mortality. Each inch he loses strips away another illusion of control. The censors almost stopped it. The script's philosophical ending was considered too abstract for a drive-in crowd. The studio demanded a monster fight, so director Jack Arnold gave them one, with a spider. But he refused to change the closing narration where Carey accepts his fate and fades into the infinite. It was one of the boldest endings of the decade. Behind the scenes, the crew built oversized sets and used forced perspective to turn matchboxes into prisons and raindrops into oceans. Critics dismissed it as pulp, but years later, scholars would hail it as a milestone in speculative fiction. Its final words, "I still exist," echo through generations of filmmakers who saw poetry in science. It is not just about shrinking. It is about vanishing gracefully into the cosmos. Number 12. The Quatermass Experiment, 1950. 5. Before Ridley Scott, before Carpenter, there was Quatermass. This British film terrified audiences who were not ready for its realism. When a rocket returns from space with only one survivor, something alien begins to grow inside him. Director Val Guest shot it like a documentary using handheld cameras and natural light. The monster was not just in the body, it was in the headlines. Censors were horrified. The British Board of Film Classification gave it the notorious X rating, which producers then turned into marketing gold by adding the letter to the title. The public queued around blocks to see it. Yet critics accused it of moral decay, claiming it blurred the line between science and sin. Behind the scenes, the budget was tiny. The creature was made from latex and glue. The sets were scavenged from BBC warehouses. But the tension was pure genius. Actor Richard Wordsworth delivered a heartbreaking performance as the infected astronaut slowly losing his humanity. Its legacy is enormous. Without Quatermass, there would be no Alien, no The Thing, no modern cosmic horror. It showed that fear could come not from outer space, but from our own scientific ambition. The final image of a burned husk in Westminster Abbey still feels like a warning. The monsters are never the aliens. They are the men who invite them in. Number 11. This Island Earth, 1955. At the time of its release, it was mocked as another Technicolor curiosity with glowing domes and awkward aliens. But look closer, and you will see the birth of modern interplanetary cinema. This Island Earth follows scientist Cal Meacham, who receives mysterious technology from a group of beings claiming to want peace. Yet the deeper he digs, the more he uncovers a dying civilization using Earth as a pawn in a galactic war. The production was cursed from the start. Universal executives constantly interfered, demanding more color, more spectacle, and less philosophy. Director Joseph Newman fought to preserve the story's tragic tone, while special effects artist Clifford Stein worked around the clock to build the groundbreaking Metaluna sequences. Those eerie matte paintings and the haunting insect-like alien became icons of 1950s sci-fi design. Censors nearly banned the ending because it portrayed alien suffering with too much sympathy. It dared to show compassion for the enemy, a dangerous thought during the Cold War. Audiences expecting pulp got pathos instead. Critics were divided, some calling it dazzling, others too human for comfort. Today, it is seen as a cornerstone of thoughtful science fiction blending adventure with melancholy. The final shot of Metaluna collapsing under atomic fire was not just visual poetry, it was prophecy. It told us our wars might one day look just the same from the stars. Number 10. Forbidden Planet, 1956. When Forbidden Planet premiered, it was like watching the future itself unfold. Audiences had never seen anything so grand, so ambitious, so dangerously intelligent. Loosely based on Shakespeare's The Tempest, it told of a stranded crew discovering a mysterious world, ruled by Dr. Morbius and his daughter. Their paradise hides a terrifying secret, a machine that manifests human thought with deadly consequences. It was MGM's most expensive science fiction production and nearly sank the studio. The sets were enormous, the visual effects revolutionary. Even the electronic score by Bibi and Louis Barron terrified executives who thought audiences would reject it. They almost pulled the movie for being too weird. Critics called it immoral for suggesting that human desire itself could destroy civilizations. Some theaters refused to screen it, fearing its psychological undertones. Yet its influence is immeasurable. From Star Trek to 2001, its fingerprints are everywhere. The sleek starship, the moral scientist, the invisible monster, all became part of sci-fi DNA. Decades later, film historians hailed it as a masterpiece ahead of its time. Its tragedy still resonates, that the greatest danger in the universe is not an alien force, but the dark corners of the human mind. Number 9. The Thing from Another World, 1951. Before John Carpenter's blood-soaked remake, there was this cold, claustrophobic original. In the frozen Arctic, scientists uncover a crashed saucer and a creature encased in ice. What follows is paranoia, isolation, and fear of the unknown. Director Christian Nyby crafted a film that mirrored early Cold War dread, a world afraid of infiltration from both without and within. It shocked audiences by replacing sleek aliens with something primal and brutal. The monster barely appears, yet its presence dominates every shadow. Censors objected to its violence and implied political metaphors. The government feared it portrayed military incompetence during a tense era of nuclear secrecy. Behind the scenes, producer Howard Hawks secretly directed much of it, infusing his trademark rapid dialogue and masculine tension. The result was a hybrid of war thriller and existential horror. Critics dismissed it as pulp, but it found its audience through late-night television decades later. Its legacy is undeniable. It birthed the paranoia of The X-Files, the terror of Alien, and the nihilism of Carpenter's later masterpiece. The Thing from Another World showed that fear is not just about the creature. It is about who we become when the ice cracks. Number 8. The War of the Worlds, 1953. When The War of the Worlds hit theaters, it was more than spectacle. It was scripture for an age terrified by atomic annihilation. Adapted from H.G. Wells' classic novel, it transformed Victorian dread into Cold War panic. The Martians no longer symbolized imperialism, they embodied the fear of unstoppable destruction raining from the skies. Director Byron Haskin created something audiences had never seen before. The burning heat rays, the collapsing churches, a crimson sky, all felt terrifyingly real. Technicians used groundbreaking visual effects and color design to paint apocalypse with elegance. Yet, beneath the explosions lay a sermon about faith and futility, mankind's helplessness against forces beyond control. Censors in several countries objected to the film's religious overtones and scenes of mass death. Paramount was nervous about its ending, suggesting that divine power, rather than science, saved humanity. Some called it propaganda, others called it a masterpiece of poetic despair. Behind the scenes, production nearly collapsed. Sets burned, cameras overheated, and the alien war machines were suspended on piano wires that snapped mid-take. But the chaos somehow mirrored the story itself: human frailty under cosmic fire. Decades later, Spielberg's remake would bring back the terror, but never the purity of that original vision. The 1953 version remains a time capsule of an era when people looked to the heavens not for hope, but for doom. It told us that invasion was not about monsters. It was about mirrors reflecting our own hunger for destruction. Number 7. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. On paper, it was a small-budget thriller from a minor studio. On screen, it became one of the most chilling allegories ever filmed. Invasion of the Body Snatchers begins in a sleepy California town where people start behaving just a little too perfect. No emotion, no soul, no humanity. The truth soon emerges. Alien pods are replacing humans one by one. Director Don Siegel wrapped his horror inside the paranoia of the 1950s. To some, it was a warning about communist infiltration. To others, it was about blind conformity under American suburbia. The ambiguity made it dangerous. Censors were uneasy, not because of gore, but because it dared to question identity itself. Behind the scenes, there was chaos. The studio insisted on adding a new ending where the protagonist survives, but Siegel's original cut ended in hopeless despair. That ending was buried for years, only to be restored decades later when audiences were ready to face its darkness. The film's legacy is colossal. It inspired remakes, parodies, and endless cultural references. Its shadow lingers in every story about clones' mind control and loss of individuality. Each pod became a metaphor for something deeper. How fear itself spreads quietly until there is nothing left of us. Invasion of the Body Snatchers remains a mirror for every generation's anxieties. Whether about politics, technology, or trust, it whispers the same truth. The enemy will not always come with teeth. Sometimes, it will come with your own face. Number 6. The Fly, 1958. When The Fly premiered, audiences screamed, then wept. It was marketed as a monster flick, but beneath the rubber mask hid tragedy of Shakespearean weight. The story follows scientist André Delambre, who experiments with teleportation. When a housefly enters, his machine man and insect merge into one doomed creature. It was pure horror and heartbreaking science fiction in equal measure. The film's moral, that obsession destroys, struck deep with post-war audiences anxious about nuclear experimentation and human ambition. Censors tried to block scenes, showing transformation, calling them too grotesque. The studio refused to cut them, knowing that horror needed to be felt, not hinted. Behind the camera, director Kurt Neumann fought a losing battle with budget and tone. The monster head was so heavy, the actor could barely move. Crew members often laughed between takes, trying to balance terror with tragedy. Yet, somehow, it worked. Vincent Price's performance as the anguished brother anchored the madness with humanity. Critics dismissed it at first, but time was kind. Its themes of identity and corruption inspired generations from Cronenberg's chilling remake to countless modern genetic nightmares. The closing cry, "Help me," whispered from the tiny human-headed fly, became one of the most haunting lines in cinematic history. The Fly was never just about mutation. It was about the horror of curiosity itself, about the moment when invention turns into damnation and man realizes he has crossed the point of no return. Number 5. Them, 1954. When Them thundered onto screens, audiences expected another drive-in monster flick. What they got instead was a masterpiece of atomic-age terror disguised as pulp. The story begins in the New Mexico desert, where strange footprints lead to something colossal. Giant ants mutated by nuclear radiation. It sounds absurd, yet director Gordon Douglas played it straight, turning fantasy into grim reality. At a time when most sci-fi films mocked fear of fallout, this one stared it dead in the eye. The desert wind carries tension like a funeral march, as soldiers, scientists, and frightened citizens confront the consequences of mankind's own weapons. The giant creatures were built with animatronic precision so realistic that censors demanded darker lighting to soften their horror. Even the sound design, those eerie clicking shrieks, became a legend in itself. Behind the scenes, Warner Bros. Had almost canceled production, fearing it was too expensive for a B picture. Then, a freak electrical fire destroyed one of the ant models and delayed filming for weeks. Yet that chaos only heightened the film's mythic aura. It opened to stunned audiences and critics who realized they were watching the first true atomic monster movie. Its influence was massive. From Godzilla to alien, echoes of Them linger everywhere. But its greatest achievement lies in the silence of its final line, a soldier staring into the desert, asking what next mutation waits beneath the sand. It was not just a warning about science, it was a prophecy that progress always comes with a price. Number 4. The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. Few films captured the spiritual pulse of the Cold War like this one. The Day the Earth Stood Still arrived when America trembled under the shadow of the bomb. Yet instead of a monster, it brought a messenger. The serene alien Klaatu and his silent enforcer Gort landing in Washington to deliver an ultimatum to mankind. Live in peace or face annihilation. The film's message was so bold that both the Pentagon and FBI monitored its production. The studio received warnings against portraying U.S. soldiers as hostile or ignorant. Director Robert Wise ignored them. He framed humanity as reckless children faced with their own extinction. The eerie theremin score by Bernard Herrmann added an unearthly sadness that made theaters fall silent. Behind the scenes, chaos brewed. Actor Michael Rennie endured claustrophobic heat in his metallic costume, while the massive Gort suit caused constant malfunctions. Studio executives wanted more action, but screenwriter Edmund North refused to cheapen its moral weight. When it premiered, it shocked audiences who expected destruction and found philosophy instead. Its legacy endures as one of the most intelligent films of the decade, a plea for peace disguised as science fiction. Decades later, the phrase Klaatu Barada Nikto would echo across pop culture as a prayer against self-destruction. It was not just about aliens, it was about salvation, the idea that perhaps humanity's greatest enemy is its refusal to listen. Number 3. When Worlds Collide, 1951. Long before CGI and disaster blockbusters, this film dared to show the end of Earth. When Worlds Collide begins with an impossible revelation. A rogue planet named Bellis is hurtling toward Earth, promising extinction. Scientists race against time to build an escape arc, while governments crumble and faith dissolves. What could have been pulp becomes a meditation on mortality and hope. It was one of the first major studio films to depict global annihilation in color. Special effects artists created breathtaking visuals with miniatures and pyrotechnics that won an Academy Award. But beneath the spectacle lay controversy. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it for portraying divine punishment as mere astronomy. Politicians accused it of spreading fatalism. Behind the scenes, production nearly imploded. Paramount executives slashed the budget mid-shoot, forcing director Rudolph Maté to improvise entire sequences using trick photography. The rocket's launch scene was filmed with smoke machines and models rigged by hand. The illusion was perfect. Audiences gasped and critics marveled at its realism. Its ending, humanity fleeing Earth as fire engulfs the planet, was both apocalyptic and uplifting. It whispered that survival comes not from strength, but from humility. When Worlds Collide remains the ancestor of every modern disaster epic, yet its heart is philosophical. A reminder that even at the end of days, mankind dreams of starting again under a different sun. Number 2. The Blob, 1958. It oozed across drive-in screens like a nightmare that refused to die. The Blob was born from the imagination of small-town filmmakers who wanted to make something weird and cheap. Instead, they made a phenomenon. The story is simple, but unforgettable. A red gelatinous organism crashes to Earth inside a meteor and devours everything in its path, growing larger with every victim. Audiences laughed at first. The creature looked absurd, but when they saw it move, slow, silent, unstoppable, laughter turned to dread. The Blob became a symbol for Cold War paranoia. It represented whatever people feared most at the time: communism, radiation conformity, or even youth rebellion itself. Some religious groups called it blasphemous for suggesting the universe could spawn evil without divine order. Censors in the United Kingdom trimmed scenes they called revolting and unfit for minors. Behind the scenes, everything went wrong. The goo that played the monster was made from silicone and red dye that stained anything it touched. Crew members destroyed multiple sets trying to contain it. The small Pennsylvania town where it was filmed nearly banned production after locals complained about late-night screaming and fake fires. Yet the film somehow survived on sheer passion. The Blob made a star out of a young Steve McQueen, though he was paid almost nothing. Its modest release turned into legend through word-of-mouth midnight screenings and drive-in lore. Decades later, Film historians hailed it as a perfect metaphor for unstoppable social fear, something that spreads quietly until it consumes the world. The Blob proved you did not need aliens with faces to scare people. You only needed a reflection of their own unease crawling toward them. Number 1. The 27th Day, 1957. When it premiered, The 27th Day slipped through theaters almost unnoticed. Too quiet, too philosophical, too unnervingly real for the era of giant monsters and ray gun fantasies. Yet beneath its modest budget hid one of the decade's boldest ideas. 5 strangers from 5 rival nations are abducted by an alien and given capsules capable of erasing all life on Earth. No invasion, no war machines, just a single question echoing through the atomic age. What will humanity choose when handed the power to end itself? The premise terrified censors. It suggested that the real threat wasn't outer space, but human fear, prejudice, and political ego. Columbia Pictures slashed its budget and demanded simpler scenes, forcing director William Asher to rely on shadows, silhouettes, and raw dialogue. Ironically, those limitations amplified the dread. The alien's calm, unseen presence felt more ominous than any rubber creature. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic. Last-minute rewrites, rushed shooting schedules, and improvised effects. But the film's core remained intact, a moral test disguised as sci-fi. Its ending, where humanity's survival hinges on compassion rather than conquest, remains quietly radical. The 27th Day wasn't a spectacle. It was a warning whispered through celluloid, one that feels even sharper today. The 1950s gave us more than monsters. It gave us metaphors. Beneath every ray gun and rocket lay fear, wonder, and the desperate hope that mankind might survive its own genius. These films were not relics. They were warnings disguised as dreams. Which one do you remember most vividly from childhood drives or midnight TV reruns? Tell us below. Like, share, and subscribe to keep forgotten cinema alive in memory before it too fades into the cosmic dark.